the last time you and I did this, it was in the middle of COVID, and I asked you, I'm sure you remember this because we've talked about this a number of times. I asked you for a book selection, and you gave me The Untethered Soul, and we have connected on that at various points. It is over my shoulder on the bookshelf. And it's this is a overly simplistic summary, but it's a book about meditation. Is that a fair overly simplistic summary?
Mm, that's
Give
part
me
of
your
it.
definition. Give me your definition.
I think it's the best book on spirituality out there. It's a
Okay.
book about learning all about awareness and acceptance, which is the two
Okay.
keys to life.
So I'm watching your game on Tuesday night, and I'm watching you guys are down, I think it's 4 with a minute left. And the one word I have to describe you is stoic. Down 4, stoic. Game winning shot potentially, stoic. And I'm wondering, is there a connection between the books you recommend and what we see on the sideline? Is there anything there?
Well, there certainly is a connection between my own work on not driving myself crazy in my mind and the books that we talk about, Fink, because that stuff really helps me. I have a whole morning routine that I utilize every single morning just to help me be okay. Because if
Mhm.
I didn't do those things, then I probably wouldn't look like that when the game-winning shot goes up.
Well, and the other thing I noticed is there's joy on your player's face. Like, I would have expected them to be very tight. I mean, the commentators in that game are saying potentially biggest upset of the year in college basketball, and your guys are smiling. I mean, Cam misses that potential game-winning 3 at the end of regulation. They go into the huddle and nobody looks stressed out at all. I see players laughing. So, but in a healthy way. So can you tell me what nurtures or develops that? I know culture is a buzzword, but what goes into creating a scenario where you can have joy in a situation where seemingly all the pressure should be on your back?
Well, it's truly moment by moment, isn't it, Fink? So I won't say that we have it all figured out from that standpoint, but we really try to promote what we call approach goals. Something I learned from one of my greatest mentors, Dr. James Burrell, wrote a book called The Psychology of Champions. And he said there's approach goals and there's avoidance goals. Approach goals is going after something, trying to go get something, trying to be proactive in making something that you want to happen. And then avoidance goals are the opposite. Avoidance goals are trying to keep something bad from happening or trying to hold on to something you have and not let it slip away. And obviously, we've seen teams over the years, and we've certainly been in that place at times where when you're playing with avoidance goals, then exactly what you don't want to happen ends up happening.
Well, it certainly seemed to benefit you guys last night. I know process doesn't always equate to outcome, but it did on Tuesday night. Is you guys won that one in overtime and really fought through a lot of adversity without ever showing the strain of it. And as I said, it did strike me as notable your sideline demeanor. I remember the days of VCU. You probably would have been very effectively in a defensive stance yourself. I mean, I like, pumping the fist. Is that a strategic you talked about your morning routine and the work you've done. Is do you want to project a stoic presence on the sideline? Is that by design?
Well, it's not necessarily one extreme or the other because there were times in that game that you're referring to, the DePaul game on Tuesday night, when I was in a defensive stance or I was pumping my fist. I think that every coach that's been doing this for a while would agree that what we learn over time is one of the best things that we can do and most important things we can do to help our players is give them the energy that they need in that current moment. And so
Mm.
it might be intensity, it might be stoicism, it might be encouragement, support. One of the things that I've learned is what they almost never need is to feel frustration from you, which happens to be
Mm.
my kryptonite as a coach. That's definitely if there was one thing you'd say, what's your kryptonite? I would say frustration. because I can be somewhat of a perfectionist, and basketball is a game of mistakes. But I can't think of too many situations where that's really the most beneficial for players, is to show them that you're frustrated.
You mentioned the morning routine that helps you. Do you mind sharing any of that to the extent to which you're comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just be really quick because I don't know that it's particularly exciting, but um, our mental skills coach Russ Roush, who's awesome, he taught me about morning light and the power of getting light particles in your eye. So as soon
Hmm.
as the sun is starting to come up, even before it actually breaks through the horizon, but it starts to get light outside. I'm outside getting some morning light particles in my eye. It's life changing. Um, before that, meditation has been really, really powerful for me. It's one of those things where I used to be one of those people that said, I'm not good at meditating. Um, but then again, one of my mentors said, well, that's exactly why you need to do it. And so every morning, meditation, morning light. I have a variety of books that I read from, just different books on different mornings. And then I like to send an excerpt from our reading to our coaching staff, our players, former players from different stops, Texas, VCU, obviously former players here. And then, even our incoming guys, trying to indoctrinate them to some extent with what's coming.
Occasionally, very fortunate media members may get an excerpt or two, which is a highlight. And I will. I
I'd be
don't think
happy
we
to
talked.
include you, Frank. There's some
I,
people that have asked, and
you've
it
done
can
it
be a little
twice.
overwhelming to send out all these texts, but that's how strongly I feel about you. That if you want to get that text in the morning, you can, and then you can always, as I tell people, you can always unsubscribe.
Well, you know what? I might send you my morning sunlight photo tomorrow because I'm obsessed with that myself. Like before the kids go to the bus stop, I'm out. I mean, it was like 10 degrees and wind chill below zero today, and I'm outside. And you got to do it. It wakes you up. So we've never talked about that either. I love that. Let me ask you about your team's personality, because obviously this was viewed as a big transition year. Tyler Kolek's gone, Oso Iguodaro's gone, and talking about that joy we see in the group and the collective, the continuity, let's say, we see in that group. But what has gone into developing this year's personality when you take away two very big individual personalities like those two?
It's a great point. I mean, those two were everything for us, and in different ways. We would call them fire and ice because Tyler and Osa were complete opposites, but they were equally phenomenal dominoes, as we like to say, for our program. So when they moved on, definitely some big shoes to fill. The biggest thing we lost with them was competitive maturity. I mean, they were just adults in the room every day, whether it was the locker room, the film room, on the court. You didn't have to worry about any type of immaturity as it related to trying to win a game. And you don't take that for granted as a coach. This year's team, I would say, is probably even more connected because, to be honest, those two, and they didn't do this in any way, but those two, in some ways, were almost separate from everyone else from a standpoint, again, of maturity because they were so advanced. It wasn't that they separated themselves, they were just older and wiser. So maybe it was hard for them sometimes to be as relatable to some of the really younger guys, although also, in particular, one of the best teammates I've ever coached, maybe the best. Cam Jones, Stevie Mitchell, David Joplin, those are our three seniors. Those guys have really been foundational pieces here at Marquette ever since they got here, and their roles have gotten bigger and bigger every year. So I would say our personality really has developed this year into the personality that those guys lead us in. And I would add Chase Ross to that as well,
Mm-hmm.
because really since the summer, he's been, arguably our second best player.
Yeah, and what a huge shot he hit on Tuesday night, that three with under a minute left to go in the game. Talking specifically about this game, as I was digging into some of the stats and analytics in preparation for this, I noticed that the steal rate was very, very high. And I know you probably haven't heard words like havoc used in a long time, but are there shades of former teams, former VCU teams? And then two-part question, if you don't mind. On top of that, what have you, let's say specifically defensively, because I know you've talked a lot about your offense. What have you incorporated into that? And does that come from any other, you've talked about mentors, any other coaches you admire or so is that I guess I'm trying to dig into the layers of that approach stemming from
Yes.
your early years as a head coach to where we are now?
Well, there's a lot there. Number one, absolutely. We've got a couple guys on our team that remind me of the best defenders that we had at VCU, and that would be Stevie Mitchell and Chase Ross. The best defensive player I ever coached was Breonte Weber at VCU. He was on track to break the all-time steals record in college basketball, and then he tore his ACL on January 30th of his senior year. I think he ended up being 12 steals shy of the record at that point. Stevie and Chase are almost that disruptive. And that would be the word, to be honest with you, Fink, that we try to bring to life as best we can in terms of the personality of our defense being disruptive. Some games were better than other games. It does not just happen when we put on a Marquette uniform, just like it did not just happen, 10 years ago when I was at VCU when we put on that uniform. But again, what makes teams really good on defense or good at stealing the ball or good at making the other team miss, it's always personnel. And again, we happen to have two of the better defenders that I've ever coached. And then we've got other guys that on most nights, on most possessions, are very, very committed. We still have some progress to make with consistency there. Certainly, our last game against DePaul was not, our best from the standpoint of, 40 minutes of defense, 45 minutes since it went to overtime. So like every other team, we're still searching and scratching and clawing for growth on that end. In terms of people that have impacted me on defense, every coach that I worked for, was lucky to work for 5 head coaches, and they all impacted me in a lot of ways. I was really lucky to work for several pressing coaches, most notably Oliver Purnell, Billy Donovan, Keith Dambrot. And those guys taught me a ton just about defensive pressure and intensity and aggressiveness. And it's funny because, he's in our league now, but the emphasis on deflections goes back through Oliver and Billy working for them. But I think they got it to some extent from, whether it's Billy working for Coach Pitino or Coach Purnell and others being influenced by Coach Pitino's presses. And so that's a big stat for us, keeping track of deflections.
Very, very interesting. My last question for you.
One other thing, Fink, that has impacted our defense way more this year than ever before, and I'm so glad that we've done this, is, we spent a bunch of time as a staff studying different football programs last August. It's one of the rare times in the year that the players go home. We don't have a ton of basketball going on. The July recruiting period is over. The way we do our recruiting, we're fortunate. We had all of our guys committed at that point. So we had a little bit of time on our hands. And, we all went and studied different football programs. I went to Alabama. Earlier in the year, I had gone to the Washington Commanders, practice, spent time in their meeting rooms, spent time with Dan Quinn. And so we have stolen more from football on the defensive end this year than ever before.
I love that. Coach, I could monopolize your entire afternoon here, but out of respect for all the things you have going on, my final question. A lot has been said about the fact that you do not recruit out of the transfer portal. By extension, that means you have great player retention and probably by extension, again, player development. My question, though, those are somewhat external narratives. If you could decide what you want Marquette basketball to be associated with, what you want people to say or feel about Marquette basketball, what would that be?
Well, I think, Fink, the most important people that we want to feel a certain way about Marquette basketball are actually the people within these walls. But I think what you're talking about is, externally what we want people to think. And certainly our fans are extremely important. Our recruits, their parents, our players' parents, all these folks are really, really important. But make no mistake about it, the most important people in terms of how they feel about what we do and who we are are guys that are just down the hall from me or downstairs in our locker room. And I would say, again, it's going to sound really repetitive, but we have three core values, three things we care about the most. Relationships, number one. So don't come here if you don't want to be highly, highly connected with the people around you and actually care about them and be willing to be cared about by them. That's not a given. Number two, growth. You mentioned the importance of that. We don't have guys coming in here that averaged 18 points a game in the Mountain West last year that we're throwing a bunch of money at. So, we got to make sure that our guy that averaged 2 points a game last year got better. And that might not mean that he averages 18 this year, but that means he can contribute to winning. And that growth, by the way, first and foremost, is as a person, because all the attributes of personal growth is what actually allows you to become a better player. Resiliency, communication skills, the ability to respond to tough situations, the ability to handle good situations, success, sacrifice, the ability to be coachable, be adaptable. These are all personal skills that make you a better player. And then thirdly, victory. We make no mistake about it, man. We're a program, like a lot of other people that's what we're here to do. And relationships, growth, and victory are highly connected with one another. They're not these separate core values in a silo. We're going to feel a certain way about each other if we win big that we won't feel about each other if we don't. We're going to feel really good about each other if we're helping each other grow and develop and get to the next stage as a person and as a player. So that's what, I guess, to answer your question, we'd want to be known for. But most importantly, I hope Stevie Mitchell and Chase Ross and Zayd Lowry and Caden Hamilton feel that way about this program.
Coach, you are one of a kind, and I appreciate you so much for your approach and your generosity of time. And thanks so much for making some time for us in your very busy schedule.
Thank you, Fink. And you are one of a kind. And I appreciate how, even though that you are advancing as a quote unquote media member, the authenticity and the ability to tell the truth and not stray from what you value that's a powerful thing. So don't lose that.
Coach, thanks so much.